Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
I want to try to wrap up this part of our Amida discussion soon. I'm not going to do what I told Tal I would do, which was collect the various different Amida Kedushas so we can look at them and compare them. We're going to come back to the Kedusha when we talk about the Amidah, and we can talk about it more then, but I feel like we're getting in the weeds a little too much, so I wanted to have an overview and then try to get out of the weeds. And I promise we'll come back to the Amidah when we talk about I'll come back to the Kedusha when we talk about the Amidah. Okay, first of all, I'm sorry, Larry?
When we left off last time, I had some questions about the prayer itself. We had gotten onto a digression.
Tell me what the question is, so I know where we're...
So it goes back to two weeks ago.
Yeah.
I listened to that I wasn't at.
Uh-huh.
So there was a long discussion about Avinu Malkeinu.
Yeah. Okay. I don't remember that discussion, but I believe you. Go ahead.
Oh, well, there was a long discussion, and you were saying that the image of Avinu Malkeinu was not an image that moderns, the Malkeinu image was not an image that moderns could accept very easily. And then you even said maybe people in England could because they can relate to a monarch. And I just wanted to comment about that one, that I personally have always found the Avinu Malkeinu image very powerful and in some sense comforting and something I relate to. And I've never really taken it literally. I always took it quite figuratively. And so I thought that it never occurred to me that people would find that off-putting at all.
Okay. I one thing I will say is, if it hasn't occurred to you that it's off-putting, it means you haven't discussed it with a lot of modern Jews who are not raised in the Orthodox tradition. I just want to tell you, lots of people find it off-putting. So I'm not saying I do or don't, but I'm just reporting to you what they tell me, Larry. Okay.
I'm sure you're correct, and it seemed to me, I'm only inferring from my own feelings, but also from the way in which I see people responding to the Avinu Malkeinu prayer.
Got it.
The second point was just...
People who come to the minyan that you choose to come to. My point just being, that's a selected population. Not the people...
For example.
Yeah.
When people are... That's where you mainly see people doing the Avinu Malkeinu prayer. My observation, maybe I'm wrong, is that people seem to get into it.
Okay. Go ahead.
The second point was you had a long discussion about how the sages put in this
Kedusha.
The Kedusha and all that. I found it very interesting. And I'm wondering, is it possible that it actually was inserted and that there was that we actually jumped to the El Baruch Nimot Yotenu? Is it possible that prayer actually stood alone by itself before the insertion of Kedusha?
Which prayer?
The end of this prayer,
yeah,
which starts with the paragraph, El Baruch Nimot Yotenu.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. Well, what I'll do, I think I'll try to do this for next week. I will bring you in probably the earliest, shortest form of this whole bracha, and that may partially answer your question. So the short answer is yes. Well, it's unclear if it's before or not. You know, the early Gaonim say, some of them say, if you're praying this alone, not in a tzibur, you don't say the Kedusha. That's not our halachic opinion. That's not how we do it. But there is early Gaonic opinion. If you are praying alone, you don't say the Kedusha, and they have a very short formulation of this bracha, which I'll try to bring you in the next week or two. The Avinu Malkeinu discussion, I don't think I want to come. I appreciate your point. I don't think I want to come back to it now. It has to do with images of God, and I think it's going to take us off topic for today, but I promise we'll come back to it at some point in the future, because inevitably we always have to come back to it, because basically it's the question of when we pray to God, how do we use different epithets of God, and how do those epithets or names or labels speak to us or not speak to us, or speak to different aspects of our understanding about God. So we'll come back to that another time, I think. Three independent things I want to say about the Amidah. One is the major difference between this, not the Amidah, the Kedusha. The first is the major difference between this Kedusha, called Kedusha de Miyushav, the seated Kedusha. Pardon? Okay. That's okay. Terry? Yeah, you got to mute. Terry's got to mute. Okay. So, first of all, the major difference between this Kedusha that we've been talking about, Kedusha de Miyushav, the seated Kedusha, also called Kedusha de Yotzer, Kedusha of the Yotzer blessing. Major difference between this Kedusha and the Kedusha, I'll put it in quotes, in the Amidah, and this is why we stand during the Amidah with our feet together, right, and we don't stand now, is the framing of it. In the Kedusha of the Amidah, we say, we are going to say these Kedusha verses just like the angels do. In other words, we are imitating the angels. We are enacting what the angels do, okay? In our Kedusha, which we're studying now, Kedusha de Miyushav, we are not enacting what the angels do. We are not saying we're like the angels. What's the framing of it? Question for the audience. It's not we are doing it like they do it, but rather, anyone?
It's third person.
Yeah, we're just saying that they do this, right? We're saying angels do this thing. Kedusha of the Amidah, we say, Nikadesh et Shimcha ba'olam. We're going to do Kedusha in this world, Kishem Shemakti Shimoto Vishmerom, like they do it in that world. So we are imitating the angels. We're saying we're going to imitate the angels and do Kedusha. In our Kedusha, seated Kedusha, we don't do that. We just say, we wake up, here's the chain of associations. The sun makes us think of the heavenly bodies. God is creator of everything. God has this array of servants up there, the sun, the moon, and the stars. And you know what they do? They hang around and praise God, saying Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. The whole thing is basically telling a story of what they do. It's not, the framing of it is not, so therefore we are going to reenact that here. It's all third person. By the way, and that is why you don't stand for this Kedusha, right? You stand for the Kedusha in the Amidah because we are imitating the angels. The angels, mythically speaking, have a straight foot, according to some midrash, and that's why we stand with our feet together. We don't walk around feet together because we're like an angel, okay? So we're enacting what the angels do. So a lot of people have a misconception about this. They say, oh, why don't we stand up during the Kedusha of the Yotzer? That is totally incorrect. We don't stand up in the Kedusha of the Yotzer because we're not imitating the angels. We're just saying, while we're talking about the sun, which makes us think of the sun, moon, and the stars, the heavenly bodies, which are imagined as God's servants, angels, hi Alba, or whatever you want to talk about it, or whatever you want to call it, we're going to tell you what these angels say. Okay? That's why we don't stand. So that's point number one. I'll pause. Is there any question or comment about that? Jonathan, you waved a hand.
Whoever translated it into English says, as in the prophet's vision. That sort of implies a little bit that...
No, I'm just quoting the prophet's vision. I'm quoting it. I got you. Right. But as in the prophet's vision, soaring celestial creatures exclaim. That's a third person. It does not say, as in the prophet's vision, we say, or something like, soaring celestial creatures exclaim, and we say, Baruch V'ad Hashem Imkamo. It's all third person. We're reporting what they do in heaven. We're just telling what they do up there. We're saying, God, you created the universe. The sun reminds us of that. The sun reminds us of the whole array of the heavenly bodies who are your servants up above. By the way, there's nothing here, again, nothing here in this blessing, I think, that says, and therefore we are your servants here below. Okay? It's all a contemplation of out there and up there. So we're contemplating, if we want to say this about God as creator, we're contemplating God as creator by talking about what we see or what we know, the sun, the angels, but none of it says what we do. Now that I said that, I'm sure someone will find one word somewhere that says we, okay? But I don't think so in general. All right, that's point number one. Then that's really important. That's the major difference I'm going to say in terms of the structural framing from Kedusha de Miyushav from Kedusha d'Amidah. Okay. Which is why it is Miyushav, why we are seated. All right. Second point is and we sort of touched on this a little bit, and it's kind of a literary point. And that is, although God's array, the hosts of heaven, are imagined as servants, as armies, they're also praising. That's the main thing they do in the Amidah. And so they're sort of envisioned as a chorus. A chorus. Okay? Sometimes we even say a chorus, yachad, together. And so one choral-like aspect of them is there is a quasi-musical character to various parts of the framing of the Amidah. I want to call it quasi-musical because we wouldn't call it musical. We would call it poetic, I think, in our common English. But it's a poetic that's meant to be sort of musical. So we had a few examples of that. Let's look at the first big paragraph, which ended, Rachem aleinu adon uzenu tzur miskavenu magein yishenu miskav ba'adenu. We had 5 rhyming pairs of words that all end in enu. We commented on that, right? That it sort of sounded like a rhyme. And then after that, we have El Baruch Gedol De'ah Hechinu Fa'al Zorei Chama Tov Yatzar Kavod Lishmo Melrot Natan Sfivot Uzo. Right? So it's a poem. It's an alphabetical acrostic. It's a poem that has 4 words per line, and each group of 2 lines rhyme with each other. Okay? Everyone with me? So that's also kind of, again, in English, I think today we think of it as poetic, but I think it's meant to be kind of musical. Okay? So again, it evokes the idea, Larry's waving, he's passing through, right? It evokes the idea of, I think it's meant to evoke the idea of God's heavenly choir. We're talking about God's heavenly choir, and we're talking about it in literarily choir-like format, quasi-musical. Okay? Jonathan, you have to unmute. Unmute, Jonathan.
What paragraph are you?
Well, which Siddur do you have? I don't know.
I have this slim one, page 31 I'm on.
Okay, so we're on page 30, Hamir La'aretz, and then 30, El Baruch Gedol De'ah, and now I'm coming to 31. If you look at the big first paragraph on 31 at the box, first paragraph on 31, the box, which is the box means where the Chazan picks up, Kulam Ahuvim, Kulam Berurim, Kulam Giborim. And notice that's an Aleph Bet Gimel also, which makes us think, oh, was that the beginning of some acrostic that we only ended up with the last, with the first 3 words of, and we lost the rest of it? Okay. And then we have V'chulam osim be'ema uv'yira ritzon konam. V'chulam potchim epihem b'kedusha uv'tahara b'shira uv'zimra. It's rhyming. Umvarchim umshabchim umfarim umaritzim umakishim umamlichim. It's rhyming. Everyone with me? So we have this whole different kinds of rhymes, different kinds of rhythms, but throughout this long bracha, we have various pieces of musicality. Middle of the last paragraph of the page, second line, third line, Kihu levado poel givurot doseh hadashot baal milchamot zoreat tzedakot matzmiach yeshuot borei, right? You hear it. 2-word couplets that are all rhyming, that are all labels of what God does. So throughout this bracha, more so than, by the way, I'd say I would challenge you, and I would win this challenge, so don't bet money against me. If I said to you, let's compare it to the second bracha of the Shema, Ahava Rabbah, or the third bracha of the Shema, Emet V'Yatziv, before the Amida, right? This has far much poetic musicality to it than those brachot do. Everyone with me on that? Hold on a second, Larry. So I think this is meant to sort of imitate what we imagine the angels are like on high. They're a chorus, okay? And we have words like zimra. They sing, okay? So we imagine them as a chorus. They sing. Now, someday, to satisfy Tal, I will bring in and Terry. This will satisfy Tal and Terry, maybe other people, I don't know. I'll bring you some examples of texts of piyutim, or poems, that were written to surround the Kedusha, especially of the Amida, where we see much, much more of this. Long poems that are rhyming, okay? And again, that are meant to evoke this idea that the creatures above, the heavenly creatures, they're like a choir praising God. So although we are not reenacting what they do in this Amida, we are talking about it in, I'm going to say, choir-like literary terms. Okay, Larry, then Meyer. Then Michael.
Very briefly, I agree with you completely. It's a beautiful poem. I love to say it in Hebrew. The English is terrible with one exception. And this Siddur does a wonderful job. It actually translates that mini acrostic you talked about.
Yep.
The Alvim Bururim.
Yep.
Giborim. And it translates it as adoring, beloved, and choice.
Good.
Where they are.
Yes.
So they actually maintain
right.
the acrostic form.
Right.
The only good thing I'll say about the translation.
Yeah. For Siddur translators, it's always a challenge of, am I just going to try to give the idea in English that makes sense to people? Or am I going to go the extra mile and attempt to reproduce some literary quality of the original? I'd like to point out, going the extra mile is really, really hard, right? Because then, like, I've seen Asham news, right, that are ABC, but don't actually translate the Asham new, right? So, okay, Meyer.
I was just thinking about what a wonderful lead-up this is toward the Shema, since basically you're emphasizing the oral quality of it.
Yes.
And ultimately, to lead to a moment at which we're supposed to be silent and listen.
Okay, good. So there's the and then the silence. Although, of course, the Shema isn't really silent. It's really, very softly. Yes. But it's a very different kind of thing. By the way, I want to point out, it doesn't mean, what I said doesn't mean, the halakha does not say that when we daven this, you're supposed to say, Baal milchamot zoreat tzedakot matzmiah, meaning you're not actually supposed to sing it. It's not actually a hymn. It's just little snatches of quasi-hymnal things. Michael.
Yes, I wanted to say that the issue of reenacting, it's analogous to when we say the Shema in Birkot HaShachar.
Yeah.
We're really saying that this is what we do twice a day, so we don't cover our eyes.
Correct. Exactly. So there's something that me and Michael's referring to page.
14 in Sim Shalom. I don't know about Slim Shalom.
And 7 in the Slim at the bottom. It's saying, yeah, we're the people. By the way, humans might be like animals. Life might be worthless. It's entirely possible. The only salvaging thought is we're part of the people that is loyal to you, and twice a day we say Shema. Correct. We are reporting that we say Shema. We're not actually doing the mitzvah of saying the Shema, and that is why we do not cover our eyes. By the way, and in some versions, depending on the Siddur you look at, that early Shema of Birchot HaShachar, sometimes you say, in some Siddurim you say the Ve'ahavta paragraph, and in some Siddurim you don't say the Ve'ahavta paragraph, right? So in some Siddurim it's only Shema Yisrael, and others it's Shema and Ve'ahavta, right? There's different minhagim about that, but we're not saying the Shema. We're just saying we are the people who say Shema. By the way, again, it's very, I do want to acknowledge, even saying that is an indicator of how bizarre halachic reasoning can make us think and sound. When I say, we're not saying the Shema, we're only saying that we say the Shema. All right, so to someone who's outside of a concept of halakha and mitzvot, that sounds kind of silly, right? We're not saying the Shema, we're just telling you a line that we say when we say the Shema. That line is the Shema. But we're not saying it. I'm not saying it. Okay, so that is correct. So analogously to that, we're not doing the Amida. In the Kedusha, we're not doing the Kedusha. In the Amida, we're going to do the Kedusha. Okay? Now we're just saying that the angels do Kedusha. Is that...
I think Tali wanted to speak too.
Yep, Tal.
If we have the theme of angels singing, but we're quoting prophets, why aren't we then talking about Zechariah, because he was the prophet that really kind of themed on the angels, but also then why aren't we talking about something like the prayer from Friday night about Shalom Aleichem, which is literally saying, Malachei Hasharet, talking about singing.
So my answer to question number 2 is because that's not in the Torah. Those aren't prophets, right? So we're quoting the prophets who had, and my answer to question number 1 is because those are the 2 prophets. Again, this takes us back to Tal. I just want to ask you: were you here, or did you listen to the class on the whole mystical thing from about 3 weeks ago? You should listen to it. It's online. It's worth listening to just because it's all about the mystics in late antiquity and rabbinic times, who their bread and butter was meditating and having mystical experiences, and how we think the sages tried to take a snippet of their mystical experience, drop it into the daily Siddur. So with the hypothesis, the general scholarly hypothesis is so that people would not be tempted to actually go out and be mystics, because that was seen as a risky thing. So we had a whole discussion about that. I just want to encourage you to go and listen to that class if you weren't there, or if you don't remember it. And the point of that was that basically we know throughout Second Temple times and into Talmudic times, there were groups of Jews who wanted to have meditational, visionary experiences in imitation of the 2 prophets who say, I saw God on God's throne. Okay? And those 2 core prophets who are seen as the core visionary experience that those mystics were trying to imitate are Yeshayahu and Yechezkel. Isaiah says, I had a vision of God on the throne, and the angel said, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. And Ezekiel says, I had a vision of God. That's in Isaiah chapter 6. And Ezekiel in chapter 1 says, I had a vision of God on the throne, and there were angels beating their wings, and I heard a loud noise that said, Baruch Kvod Hashem Imkamo. So those are the 2 prophets who say, in my vision, I heard what the angels say up in heaven. Right? So there are lots of other prophets like Zechariah who you cite, and other ones who had all kinds of visions, and sometimes they had visions of God, and sometimes they had visions of an angel. But these are understood to be the 2 core prophets who had a vision of, this is what the angels are doing in heaven. This is what it's like in God's heavenly throne room. And we as mystics, want to try to get as close as we can to that experience, and they develop all sorts of meditational techniques to actually do that. But the core, I'm going to say the pearl and the oyster out of which they create that is Isaiah and Ezekiel, those two prophets. So that's my answer to question number one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So Zechariah has visions, other people has visions, Amos has a vision, but and Ezekiel has lots of other visions, okay? So lots of them have visions, right? But these are the two that have a vision of, I saw the throne room, I saw God on the throne, I heard the angels, and this is what they say. So this is taken as, this is the beings in the universe who are closest to God are those angels. This is what they say. And we mystics want to try to evoke an experience that's as close as possible to be an imitation of that. And then the rabbis of the mainstream, the Talmud and the Siddur, dropped all of the meditational stuff, and they just turned it into, and this is what the angels say. Okay. But if you go into a real davening shul, okay, a serious davening shul, and you look at people during the Kedusha of standing, that's as close as we come in mainstream Judaism to that mystical experience, right? If you see people, right, this tends to happen more in Orthodox shuls. I don't want to stereotype. It happens in some non-Orthodox shuls, somewhat. But if you see people standing during Kedusha with their taluses over their heads, saying Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh with fervor, okay, that's as close in a contemporary synagogue as you will come to, like why the sages, why whoever wrote the Siddur put the Kedusha into the Amida. Everyone follow what I'm saying? Right? So you see people davening with fervor. It's I wouldn't call it a meditation because people who are serious meditators like Rabbi Ruth Sohn might consider that an insult. But I would say it's as close as we get to meditational in our mainstream davening style, if that's a fair enough statement. Given that our mainstream davening generally isn't meditational, this is as close as we get, I think, to approximating what those mystics wanted to have as an experience. Okay, I'm going to take another 2 minutes just to drop something on you to think about, then we'll come back to it next week if you want to. Third point I want to make about the Kedusha, and then next week I want to come back to the blessing of the Yotzer and try to finish it and pull it together because we got to get out of the weeds here. Comes from a totally different place, the Kabbalah. Okay, forget everything I just said. Totally unrelated thought, but a third point. All religions, I don't know about all religions, because what do I know about all religions? But people say all religions need to address the conceptual tension or contradiction or conundrum of how is it that God is both transcendent and immanent. Immanent is spelled I-M-M-A, not I-M-M-I. And those are fancy theological words for God is very big and out there. God made the universe. God made the Big Bang. God somehow decided that, as I read in the paper the other week, there was a slight preponderance of neutrinos more than antineutrinos, and that's why matter exists. Okay. As opposed to everything is just antimatter and it all collapsed into nothing. So on the one hand, God is very big and all out there. Breshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. That's transcendent. That's a transcendent view of God. God is the God of the universe. But if that were it, then many people would experience that God as cold, aloof, and remote. So we also talk about God as...
We just lost you.
You lost me? Did you lose me? Can you hear me?
No, we see you, hear you.
Okay.
Michael did.
Okay. All right, you hear me? Not if you hear me. Not if you can hear me. Okay. All right, so God is also immanent. That means close, which means if I'm sick and I pray, I hope that God hears me. When I add the names of sick friends in the Rifa'enu in the morning, I hope that God hears my prayers and heals my friends. So that's the God of the psalmist, the God who is very, very close. Okay? How is it possible that God is the God of the universe and worried about neutrinos and anti-neutrinos, but that same deity might actually hear everyone's prayers, including my prayers? Right? So all religious systems talk about God is both transcendent and immanent, or far away yet very close, or very universal and out there, but also very particular. Okay? Everyone with me on that? So all religious systems have to kind of address that tension, and sometimes they talk about God is big, and sometimes they talk about God is small. The Kabbalah sees, or one Kabbalistic interpretation, okay, and Hasidic interpretation of the Kedusha is, when I say the Kedusha, I mean the two core lines from the two big prophets, is that it is a way of addressing this tension. Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzvaot, Milochol Haaretz Kivodo is the transcendent God. God is everywhere in the universe. Okay? God, remember, Isaiah in chapter 6 sees the vision of God on the throne, and God's, the hem of God's kingly robe fills the whole palace room. Okay? Yet the angels are there too. Somehow it's magical because it's dream logic. Okay? So God is universal. The sun, moon, the stars are very far away. They praise God. Okay? God's out there in the stars. He's in the DNA. God is everywhere and everything. Okay? That's Milochol Haaretz Kvodo. The whole universe is filled with God. That's universal God or transcendent God. However, or in addition to that, Baruch Kivod Hashem Mimakomo, God's blessingness flows from its place. I'm going to finish the thought, the Hasidic, Kabbalistic thought, parentheses, into everything. God's blessed, Baruch Kivod Hashem Mimakomo, God's infusion of blessing flows from its place into everywhere, including into prayers to heal the sick and hearing my particular concerns. In Chassidut, by the way, in Kabbalah, these two aspects of God are called Sovev and Mimale. God surrounds everything and God fills everything. And that's why our Friday night davening every other Friday night at Temple Beth is called Shabbat Sovev. It's based on that idea. And I always forget about Sovev and Mimale, surrounding and filling. I always forget which is transcendent and which is immanent. I always get them mixed up. Okay? Because I usually think Sovev is transcendent and Mimale is immanent, but I might be actually the other way around. I always get them wrong. Anyway, so the Kedusha is a way, so according to Kabbalistic and Hasidic thinking, the Kedusha is an encapsulation of this profound theological challenge that God is both Milochol Haaretz Kivodo, the whole universe is God, is filled with God, okay? Not is God, because that would be pantheism, but rather is filled with God, which is called panentheism. God is present in everything for the Kabbalah. God's energy flows through the entire universe, or God is the energy which flows through the entire universe, right? It's very out there, very big concept, but also Baruch Kavod Hashem in Komo. Hashem's infusion and blessing flows out of all that into everything. Okay? So for Kabbalistic and Hasidic thinking, the Kedusha is a way of encapsulating this tension. By the way, and I would say the same thing, and we'll repeat the same thing when we get to the Shema and Baruch Kvod Shem Kvod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. It's the same thing. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is big God, transcendent, is understood to be big transcendent God. everything in the universe, all the manifestations that we might call different gods are actually echad. It's a very big, universalistic, transcendent idea of God. But Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto L'Olam Va'ed, again, Baruch mean in the sense of flowing of blessing, is into everything. So Chassidut and Kabbalah also understands these first two lines of the Shema to be expressing the same tension of transcendent and immanent. God is transcendent, yet God is immanent. So again, we have in this explanation a way to say, in our daily Siddur, we are giving people grist for the mill to think about of profound theological thoughts. You don't have to go read Maimonides' Guide to the Complex, for the perplexed, to talk about ideas that are complex. Okay? You can wake up in the morning and in your daily davening contemplate some profound theological ideas. God is universal, yet God is particular. God is God of the universe, yet God is the God that I pray to when I need something, and I hope that God is listening and will respond to my prayer. How do we put those things together, right? And the Siddur says, we put it together by just saying, God is this, and God is that. Melo chol haaretz kavodo, but also flowing into everything. Everyone follow me? So that is kind of, I think, I like that Kabbalistic and Hasidic understanding of the Kedusha, okay? Because then we're not just talking about, the angels, which again is hard for us to, do this thing. By the way, when I say the Kedusha alone in my yard, I hear the birds, I sort of think like, if I were writing this today, as opposed to someone writing it 1,500 years ago, I don't think I'd be thinking about astral bodies. I think I would be thinking of the birds chirping. I'd be saying, the birds are chirping and praising God, and so we do that too. That's just me, If I said to you, what's the thing that's out there in the world that evokes in you praise of God, that would inspire you to praise God? We'd all have our own answers. So for the mystics of long ago, it was the visions of Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu. For me personally, it's when I hear the birds in my yard. By the way, I'm not the first person who's done that. There's an old prayer called Perek Shirah, which is an obscure thing, which is only found in Siddurim that have very small print and are 700 pages long. And it's from about the year 1000-ish or before. And it's about how each individual thing in nature praises God. The birds say this verse. The frogs say that verse. The monkey says that verse, the lion says that verse, and it quotes all these different verses from the Bible, some of which are explicitly about birds or trees, but other ones you'll say like, why did they say the monkey says that? The lion has nothing to do with monkey.
Can you share that?
And it's basically, what? Pardon?
Will you share that with us maybe? Yeah.
By Rabbi Natan Slifkin, who is known as the zoo rabbi. He's that rabbi in Beit Shemesh who's a nature guy, and he gets his books banned by his fellow Haredi rabbis because he believes in things like dinosaur fossils, rather than saying dinosaur fossils are fabricated by God to test our faith, right? He says no, they were real dinosaurs, and they existed before humans existed, right? So his books have been put in Cherem, and he's had to reprint some of them. Anyway, so he has this, with, does it have picture? Unfortunately, it just has black and white pictures. He didn't shell out money for, color plates of all those things, which would have cost money. But he talks about, the apple, what does it say? Right? The raven, what does it say? So that's a little prayer called Perek Shirah, which is generally not recited as a day-to-day thing. I've never met any, although it says, it's good to say this every day, but I've never met. Terry, I'll find you a link to it. All right. Last thing I'm going to say is, because we have various things like what you say for people who don't believe in saying Kaddish in Corona site, is, I'm just going to say this one more time. If you will send me an email, abrahamhavivi@gmail.com, then I will put you on a list, and I will periodically send out things like that are links to things that I think the Siddur class, people in the Siddur class, would find it interesting. So you'll make my life simpler if you do that today, because then today I can make an email group, and then forever after I will have that email group. Okay? abrahamhavivi@gmail.com. So if you want to from time to time get emails from me about, here's a link to an interesting prayer thing, then please send me your email address, abrahamhavivi@gmail.com.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.